Good morning, everyone. Okay, so basically, I know the title, Konstantin destroying Dave Smith and Piers Morgan. I haven't actually watched it. We're watching it together. I've seen a few clips. I just thought I'd make a title that'll rile up the haters, and everybody's got a major opinion on this. So I'm gonna watch it, unpack it, react in real time. I want to watch it anyways, just so. If there's anything, because these sorts of videos, what I usually do is I watch it and either react in small clips on X or whatever. So let's do it together. I just so you know, the way I watch it is I do it at 1.25, 15, speed 1.5 or 1.25, and then slow it down when there's things that I really want to hear or rewind it and listen again. Make sure to smash the like, share it if you're enjoying the stream. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I know my new lives, they're not, when I focus on making videos out on the street, obviously the channel grows much faster. That's what people are used to seeing. Lives, people are not used to me doing it. I'm doing a lot more of them. I enjoy doing them. And we're doing all sorts of lives. But let's get straight into it, and let's see how we go. And please brace yourselves. We've got to watch Piers Morgan, but I'm really interested in seeing how this debate actually goes. Let's watch.
When the stakes are so high and the consequences are so significant, everybody gets a say. In my view, that applies even if you haven't been to the place where it's happening. Much of the debate about the Iran crisis and others seems to boil down to some big themes: morality versus reality, idealism or pragmatism, intervention versus isolation, populists or lobbyists. For a big picture debate on a world at war, I'm joined by two of our favourite uncensored contributors who often trade respectful barbs on these matters and more. Konstantin Kisin is an author, satirist and co-host of Trigonometry. Dave Smith is a libertarian commentator, a comedian and the host of Part of the Problem. Well, welcome to both of you. Dave, great to have you back so soon. As you know, after your last appearance, I got chewed up and spat across cyberspace, which I found quite an amusing thing to watch go down. What did you make of it?
Oh, I thought it was just so pathetic.
Yeah.
I mean, I had mentioned this before, but if you, as I'm sure you do recall, but after my my friend Daryl Cooper was on Tucker Carlson's show and he made some comments that you objected to, and I was defending him and giving my point of view on it. You had me on a panel. It's probably the most contentious that me and you have been on the show. You had me on 3-on-1 with it was Seth Dillon and then a world-renowned historian from the House of Lords. Like the leading expert.
He actually
on
is
World
Andrew
War II.
Roberts. Yeah.
Yeah, and I took my lumps. I tried to make my argument as compelling as I could. It was I didn't go online and just throw a bitch fest for the next week over how unfair it was. It's just pathetic. And I'm sorry, but Natasha was just lying through her teeth the whole time. And she and lies that, as you pointed out, insult the intelligence of the host and the viewers. And I thought you were
This is such a weird new phenomena where you have Dave Smith on every debate he's on now. He has to have a wingman. And here specifically, Piers Morgan has become they've got this new bromance where they support each other. And even in the clip, I saw one clip, which obviously we'll get to in this debate, where he refers, Piers Morgan is supposed to be the moderator here. He's not supposed to be taking a side. He's supposed to be moderating the debate between them. But it's opened up. Piers is basically saying, if you don't know what they're referring to the last debate that Dave Smith was having against the international lawyer, and essentially what ended up happening in this debate is it was not Dave Smith versus this lawyer. It was I think she's a human rights lawyer, but basically it was Piers Morgan just shouting down, not letting her respond to anything like Piers Morgan usually does. But it was an extra, like Piers was in a particular bullyish type of mood. And he copped it online, because even if you agree with his position, it was just weird. You invited this girl who is an expert in this particular area. You've asked her on to have a debate against a comedian who's become the new expert. Fine, whatever. He has opinions, she has opinions, so they can hash out their ideas and put their best arguments forward. But then it just ended up being like 2-on-1, plus it was more of Piers Morgan just not allowing her to answer the simple questions. Natasha lied. Natasha lied for them is just they didn't like her answers. And Natasha didn't lie. Natasha made far far more sense than any of what Piers Morgan had. Piers Morgan has like 5 arguments he just regurgitates, and I guarantee he's doing it here because I saw it. I saw on that same clip where he just regurgitates the most nonsense, maybe not totally irrelevant, but it's like he hangs his hat on 1 or 2 arguments. Anyways, by the way, any super chats, I will read them. Otherwise, yeah, let me know in the chats what you guys are thinking or any points that you want to make, and I will hopefully see. I will read them as I'm going.
Absolutely right to give her pushback for that. So it was. I thought. Number one, I thought you were right on the show. Obviously, admittedly, I'm a little bit biased on the topic, but I thought the reaction online was just truly embarrassing.
You know what was interesting? If they'd actually just said to me, you know what?
And this is coming from Dave Smith, who spent about 3 or 4 months online going on about how he won the debate against Douglas Murray. Where, yeah, like, to the low IQ people, he did win a couple of, like, really like minor points, but not on the facts, more about the, you know, like, I don't think Douglas Murray playing the you should be there, you know, I get what he was trying to say. He was trying to point out that, you know, somebody who can actually go to a place and chooses not to go to the place, but spends his entire comedic last 2 years as a professional comedian, spends that focused on a certain place that he can go and visit. But that was like Dave Smith's entire, like, for 2-3 months, that's all he focused on online, is going on about how much he dominated Douglas Murray. But when you actually listen to the substance of the arguments, Dave Smith didn't win. They're all delusional, but it's easy
online. Did you go
online.
a little bit too far in the interrupting? Could you have reined back 10, 20%? I probably would have said yes, probably. I conceded that to some friends of mine. Yeah, probably slightly overdid it. My mother's always a good litmus test. She was like, you did go at her a bit. You know, I was like, okay. But then I was reminded that she was telling massive whoppers with real consequential elements to them, denying, you know, appalling things like the killing of the 9 out of 10 children in that one airstrike and so on, or at least trying to cast doubt over whether it had been proven, which I just found so reprehensible. But also, I just felt this is somebody who purports to be an international barrister in this area, who's clearly has got a horse in the race, right? Because it's Lawyers for Israel, who she represents. If you can't handle a bit of interrupting.
So we're 4 minutes in. And so far what's happened, he's introduced Dave Smith, who's turned around and pat Piers Morgan on the back for the way he bullied a well-renowned barrister in the particular area they were debating. And now Piers is sitting here going, I got a bit, I understood a little bit of the criticism because Mummy told me, and now going to justify why bad. So it's them two just patting each other on the back, and we're 4.5 minutes into this video.
From someone like me, you're probably in the wrong profession, is what I thought. It's like, it's supposed to be part of your job, literally arguing with people, often in an animated way. Anyway, let's get into this argument.
Let's do it.
Because this was precipitated, for those who don't follow you guys as assiduously as I do, and I'm a big fan of both of you. Konstantin, you called out Dave on X for accusing the actor Rob Schneider of talking with confidence on topics he doesn't necessarily understand. You said that's exactly what Douglas Murray had accused Dave of doing when they had a spat on Joe Rogan. And you said, on X, I'm not trying to be a dick, but this is exactly what Douglas was saying to you. He was saying you talk about things you don't understand with a level of confidence that is inappropriate, and you pretended he was calling for censorship. You can't have it both ways. Okay, you've got Dave sitting here. You don't want to be...
Again, so notice the introduction for Dave Smith just from the get-go. Introduction for Dave Smith, warm, they pat each other on the back, we're amazing, we're good, this is the best thing. And then straight into, okay, you've said this about Dave, my friend Dave. Go. He's here now, say it to his face.
Dick, which I appreciate because I've had a festival of that from George Galloway this week. So let's not get into dick measurement contests. But this whole argument really about people who are supposedly ill-equipped to talk about things. Whether
Mitch, don't be too triggered. I haven't actually watched it. I'm just saying he destroyed Dave Smith just to trigger people like you.
It's Dave because he's a comedian by stock in trade, whether it's Rob Schneider, whether it's anyone really. Explain where you come from on that.
Well, first of all, you say it's been precipitated by this. I think the disagreements between Dave and I run about as long as the Iran-Israel conflict, and probably longer. So we disagree on a lot of stuff. You've invited me on your show many, many times over the last year. I've always said no when talking about this stuff because I don't consider myself an expert on these issues, which is why I've consistently turned it down. The only reason I'm here tonight, by the way, is you said to me, I'm not going on your show until you come back on mine, and I thought that was actually fair enough. So particularly given that you have me here with somebody who's also not an expert, this is essentially two guys in a bar, in a pub, chatting about their opinions. So that's fine. However, I think the reality is that an issue of this complexity and seriousness should not be addressed by a former comedian and a current comedian. I don't really think that's the right approach. But my point to Dave is something else. My point.
Yes. And the thing is, I would take Konstantin's position way more seriously than Dave Smith. Dave Smith is just such a lightweight in this stuff. He can talk. He's articulate. He can make his argument in a really whiny way, but he makes it. But he really, like, it's just such a... If you're going to compare the two people we're going to take seriously, I will take Konstantin way more seriously every single time. But maybe that's just
whenever
me.
He wants to take a shortcut and disagree with someone who's saying something that's different to him, he will resort to exactly the same thing that Douglas said to him, which is, you actually don't really know what you're talking about. You don't have the expertise to talk about this. You haven't been to the region. You haven't read enough. You haven't done this. You haven't done that. And that's exactly what Douglas was saying to Dave. Now, you can agree or disagree with whether that's right or wrong, but the fact that Dave is violating his own standards seems to me to be pretty hypocritical.
Dave, you're a rank hypocrite.
That's what Piers saying and not me. I did not add the word rank.
Yeah, you would have done.
And he is a rank hypocrite. And the fact is, again, just watch the dynamic, understand the dynamic in this debate. It's clearly Piers is cheering on Dave already and backing him up, kind of mocking what Konstantin is saying. He's like, you're a rank hypocrite. How do you answer that?
A bit. No, I'm sorry. There's for the record, I just want to say me and Rob Schneider made up. I've always been a big fan of his. We message back and forth and we're cool. But no.
Irrelevant to the point. Irrelevant. You said what you said. So for those of you who don't know, on Twitter, he literally made the same argument on X. He made the same argument that he, for months, was harping on about, almost arguing that it was the reason, or one of the main reasons, that he saw himself as the winner in that debate.
Sorry, obviously this is ridiculous, and there's no hypocrisy here at all. It is if we were to come to a debate, and what I brought to the debate was I just said, shut up. And that was all I did for the debate, was just tell you to shut up. And I had no argument, and I didn't counter any of your arguments, but I just told you to shut up. And you were to say, man, that was a really ridiculous way to debate. And then I pointed out that you had also told someone to shut up once in your life. That wouldn't mean you're guilty of hypocrisy. It's a completely different standard to be dismissive to someone on Twitter than to agree to debate them on the biggest show in the world. Show up.
So he's right about that argument, and that's what it's like, a straw man argument. And sorry, Dave, Joe Rogan isn't here to bail you out, Shay says. I'll read all super chats. So if you're going to super chat, I'll definitely bring them up. But yeah, you're right. He doesn't have Joe Rogan there, but he has Piers Morgan. So Shay, I wouldn't get too excited. So his argument there is a straw man argument because he's saying that essentially, if you walk into a debate and you just say shut up and that's your argument and that's your counter argument or your argument the whole time, then that's not really a debate. You're not that can't be used as you can't use that as the win. And he's actually straight up saying that that's what Douglas Murray did in the debate between Douglas Murray and Dave Smith and Joe Rogan. How am I forgetting names? Between him and it's absolutely not what he did. That was a long debate, and if anyone had actual substance and facts behind him, it was Douglas Murray. It was 100% Dave Smith that came lacking facts, coming with complete emotional arguments when it came to international law. He wasn't using any, and he was saying, I don't care what international law says. It's about morals, so about emotions. If you look at, so he's just like a lefty argument, and that is not what, so you can't turn around and say that he didn't actually come with any arguments. He just told you to shut up. He didn't. He pointed out at one point in the debate, the fact that you keep rerunning that one particular point doesn't mean the whole debate was that. That was the whole debate in Dave's head.
front of tens of millions of people, and your argument essentially is just to dismiss them. Your point doesn't matter. So no, and also clearly I wasn't telling Rob Schneider because he's a comedian he can't have an opinion on this. I was telling him that I don't really think he knows what he's talking about on this issue, and then
which is exactly what Douglas said to you.
It's exactly what.
Yes, but he didn't back it up with anything. That's the point.
And by the way,
no one would have had a problem. The whole point was that Douglas had an opportunity to demonstrate his superior level of expertise,
and he did
not. And this is the overwhelming opinion.
Well, I don't think that's quite true. I think on a lot of the subjects you debated, he actually did give very good reasons why he disagreed. Now, as you remember, I wrote an article at the time talking about that situation. I did concede that I thought Douglas should have lent more into the arguments. The way you and I have always debated has been on that basis, right? And I think that is true. But I don't think this argument about Twitter really works, because when you go on our mutual friend's Joe Rogan show, you're in front of millions of people. When you and I are exchanging, or you and Rob are exchanging arguments on X, we're also in front of millions of people. We're also having a debate. I don't understand what the difference is.
You don't understand the difference between like dismissing someone on Twitter and agreeing to debate them and showing up with nothing but
Rob made a series
them?
of arguments on Twitter to you in front of those same millions of people that saw you on Joe Rogan, and instead of addressing his arguments with counter arguments, which is the standard that you normally apply and you demand that other people apply to you, you instead basically said, "Shut up, Rob. You don't know what you're talking about."
Piers.
Just because you read one book doesn't mean you know what you're talking about, which is
So the tactic that Dave Smith is doing, and just pick up on it if you ever have debates or if you watch a lot of debates, you can see this. So what he's doing there, and sometimes it's okay to do this, but in this case, it's specifically being used because he doesn't have a counter argument. He can't answer. So what he's doing when he's asked a question which is obvious, and it's true, like it's true what Konstantin is saying, like. What's the difference between you having a back and forth in a debate on Twitter, which is in front of millions of people because of the size audience both of you have, and millions of people on Joe Rogan? What is it? He goes, "You don't see the difference between," and it's like, no, I don't. That was literally my point. So I clearly don't see the difference between those two, because there really is no difference. Why would the argument that you don't know what you're talking about in the context of a debating, they were going back and forth, how is that suddenly okay when you say you won an entire debate based off that singular argument? There is no difference. The only reason why you're defending it now is because you used it.
exactly what a lot of people said to you, and you got very upset about it and pretended they were trying to censor you.
No, okay. There's a couple different things here. Number one, Piers, as I told you, I believe were my first appearance after the Douglas Murray debate on Joe Rogan. And the first thing I said to you was that I go, look, there's been a lot of people who have been challenged to debates who say, I'm not going to debate that guy. He's beneath me. I've done that with other people. And then there's been people who accept and show up to the debate. I said, Douglas Murray's fatal flaw was that he did both. He accepted and then showed up and said, I'm above you. I shouldn't even be debating you. And it backfired on him.
So that's true. I don't think it backfired on him. I think anyone with a higher than double-digit IQ and isn't already completely in one camp will watch that, and for the substance of it, Douglas Murray won the debate. I do agree, and the disappointing part in that Douglas Murray debate, but you also got to remember it was 2-on-1. It was the biggest podcaster in the world, backed up by this comedian that's become the expert on this specific topic. It was 2 against 1, and I think he got too defensive, and he wasn't prepared for that. Maybe he thought because he had a friendship with Joe Rogan that Joe Rogan was going to be maybe a little bit more unbiased, but I don't know how you would get to that when it was clear what would happen, and especially because of the way it all played out, the fact that he would only come on. He would only come to talk to basically Joe Rogan, from what I remember, would only agree to have Douglas Murray on to talk about it if his friend Dave Smith was there to back him up. So he should have known he's walking into a 2-on-1 thing. But I think Dave Smith has a point that Douglas Murray came in defensive, and that he saw Dave Smith beneath him, which Dave Smith's secret is way beneath Douglas Murray. But I don't think he should have played it. He shouldn't have shown that when he was debating him. I just don't think it helped him. What's going on here?
Now, as far as your I'm sorry, what was your second point there? I had another response to that. What was the other thing you said, Konstantin?
I don't remember the sequence of the points that I made. What do you mean exactly?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna save you both, because I think we've probably dealt with the the element about whether you should be debating or talking about these
You're
things.
right.
We're both here to talk about stuff.
You're right, Paul. Debating is a skill set that you must learn and train hard and practice. True, but Douglas is quite skilled at it, and Dave Smith has become quite skilled at it. I think, it's easy to sit back. It's easy to sit here and break it down in hindsight when you see all the arguments. Like sometimes I watch really good debaters and I think, man, he should have said this, and it would be a killer argument. But then when I'm up there debating, my head goes blank myself. So my job in reacting to this debate is a lot easier than, let's say, Konstantin having to be at 2 against 1.
What you said, that Donald Trump, you believe, has played an absolute blinder in the Middle East. Dave, to put it mildly, does not agree and thinks he should now be impeached for betrayal. So first of all, Konstantin, why, in your estimation, has Trump played an absolute blinder?
Just to put this in context, I said this, I think, on Friday. I spent that week when these initial strikes happened in Washington, D.C., and the point that I was making...
By the way, do you guys agree that watching this at 1.2, what are we watching it at? 1.25? Are we watching? Usually I watch at 1.2. Yeah, 1.25. It's better, isn't it? It gets so slow otherwise. Anyways, sorry.
I don't think that, certainly none of the people I met in Washington, D.C. with any insider knowledge thought that Benjamin Netanyahu had ordered these strikes without at least a wink and a nod from President Trump. So President Trump is doing something that from what I remember, he said it between 30 and 40 times on the campaign trail, which is Iran must not be allowed to get a bomb. And he's achieving that outcome while not taking any of the blame or any of the flag for it. That was the case on Friday. Obviously, the situation has evolved since then, and there's now a much bigger debate. But at that time, he had absolutely played a blinder in allowing Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli military to achieve the military objective, while also sort of claiming that he's not involved and kind of at that time
if he now gets involved, as the jungle drums seem to be suggesting, that is a massive moment for Donald Trump, I would say. I mean, you could argue that is the most important decision he will have taken as a president, and maybe the most important decision he ever takes. If he actually starts bombing with American forces Iran, that is a massive thing to be doing. Do you think it's, as Tucker Carlson says, something that could imperil his presidency?
We are in the unknown, so nobody knows how this is going to play out. I think we should all be honest about that and be fair. What I think it really fundamentally depends on is what you mean by the word involved. If you mean that America is going to help Israel shoot down ballistic missiles, I don't know that will be such a major decision or will be seen as
Well, let me paint a picture where they use a B-52 bomber and they drop one of these buster bombs to try and get to the nuclear sites that the Israelis can't get to because they haven't got that technology. If they were to do that, in other words, directly use American forces to do the bombing, would your calculation about Trump change?
These are all hypotheticals, Piers. The one thing that I do know, and I think Dave will tell you this himself, is the thing that people in the United States, from talking to people there, are most concerned about is any sort of boots on the ground scenario. They do not want American soldiers in the Middle East. I think they're right not to. I genuinely think that. And so fundamentally, it really depends on what happens and the way that it happens. And you're right, it is a big decision. But I think it's all this stuff. I mean, Dave's calling for President Trump to be impeached over this, when this is something that he promised the American people 30 to 40 times on the campaign trail.
Well, okay. But on that, I would clarify that. He said that number of times that Iran should not be allowed to have a nuclear bomb. That is indisputable. He also has consistently portrayed himself as a man who wants peace, not war. I'm going to solve the problem in Ukraine, solve the Middle East, and so on. This would go against all of his claims to be that person. And of course, the big debate behind all this is that Tulsi Gabbard, his own director of national intelligence.
So, firstly, no, it doesn't go against that. Secondly, you can see it's 2-on-1 debate. Dave is just sitting there quietly because, again, Piers Morgan, the know-it-all of everything, is actually there to also debate Konstantin. But he's missing the one point that Trump was campaigning the whole time, peace through strength and no more wars, no more forever wars. But peace through strength, he was always saying he was never going to let Iran get a hold of a nuclear weapon. And the other way to do it is the Obama way, where he allowed Iran to do whatever it wanted at the end of the day, and look where that got us. So it got us it empowered Iran, and basically it paved the way for them to build up all their proxies. So from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Assad regime, until Israel dealt with those, and now is the time where. I agree with Konstantin. No one's asking for boots on the ground. There is going to be no boots on the ground. But the idea that if if America uses that bunker buster bomb to destroy that last, this is the hypothetical, and it may well happen. I hope it doesn't. I hope Israel does it without them. But anyway, just to shut lunatics up like this. But if America does it, how's it exactly going to send America into some big war? Nobody's stepping in. Nothing's going to change. All that's going to happen is that they're going to blow up that nuclear facility. That's it.
The IAEA director last night, they both said in very recent times, including 24 hours ago, in the case of the Atomic Agency, that there is no evidence that they've seen that Iran is anywhere near progressing to an actual nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key point of this.
So I like Tulsi Gabbard. We've had her on Trigonometry. I think she's a great human being, which is why I did her the courtesy of watching the full clip of her testimony that she gave. And what she says in that testimony is that Iran is not pursuing the nuclear weapons program, but what Iran is doing is enriching uranium to 60% and beyond, which is a clear indication of their desire either to actually make nuclear weapons or to move much, much closer to a position to be able to make them. As I think Dave would concede from all the nuclear scientists, what they're saying is you need about 3 to 5% enriched uranium for civilian purposes. They are now enriching uranium to 60%. And by the way, this is also in the IAEA report, and no one's talking about this. They're using their 20% uranium to make 60% uranium, which is, again, an indicator of the fact that they're moving either towards attempting to make nuclear weapons at some point or to be in a position to do so. And that is the threat. And there is no other reason for them to be doing that. So, yes, they don't have the exact bomb ready to go, but they're moving in that direction. And Israel is in a position to deal with that threat for the first time in a very long time. And I understand why they're doing it.
Okay, Dave, before we get to your response to that, just explain to people why you have called what Donald Trump is doing a betrayal and why you think he should be impeached.
Well, I think he has brought us into a war with Iran. Now, how much this war escalates, we will see. And I think that this is it is the most profoundly risky and reckless policy he could have pursued, or just about. I think this is very likely going to lead to a catastrophe, much like all of the other terror wars, including the one, Piers, that you heroically led the opposition in the UK to in 2003, of course, referring to the war in Iraq. And as you remember well, Piers, from that war, the justifications just kept constantly changing. And then when one fell away, they'd move to the next one. Oh, he was in on 9/11. Okay, he wasn't in on 9/11, but he's got weapons of mass destruction. Okay, he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, but we have to liberate the people or bring democracy. And I've already seen that it's remarkable how sped up it is. I've already seen so many of the war hawks bouncing back and forth between all of these different justifications. But of course, in the end there, all of the justifications failed. Not only did he not have weapons of mass destruction, not only was he not in on 9/11, but we also didn't liberate the people. The worst thing that ever happened to the people of Iraq was George W. Bush's war there. And as far as Iran enriching up to 60%, yes, it's true that they only need, I think, between 3 to 5% for civilian nuclear purposes, and maybe something like around 20 to 25% for some medical needs. But that is what is known as a latent nuclear deterrent. There is another reason why they would have that. They want to demonstrate that they can get the bomb, but they don't have it right now to stop something like this happening. But the bottom line is that since 2007, our CIA has said they don't have nuclear weapons, and they're not striving to achieve them. Tulsi Gabbard, not only in her testimony, but in the Director of National Intelligence, as her capacity serving that role, in the annual threat assessment just put out a couple months ago, reaffirmed the same thing. And so is the global community. Iran has been willing to negotiate this entire time. And maybe the negotiations haven't been successful, but even Benjamin Netanyahu, in his interview with Brett Baer the other day, couldn't even manage to lie and say that they've broken out and they're pursuing. He said maybe a year. The same thing he's been saying since I was 7 years old, lying over and over and over again because he wants a regime change war here. And he's said this in his own words, and so have all of the neoconservatives. Look, right here on your show, Piers, which I think might be the most fascinating moment in the history of Uncensored, when General Wesley Clark reaffirmed that not only had he seen the plans to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years, but that it went all the way back to the early 90s, and that it was revived, in his words, in a study paid for by the Israelis. They've gotten the 6 other ones. This is the 7th one. This war is not about nukes that Iran doesn't have. And just one more point I would make, as the great Scott Horton said the other day. Look, I mean, even
Dave should be happy then. This is the last of 7. He always refers back to that paper from all those years ago, and it's probably true that, man, there's plans for everything, and the fact that there was a plan for regime change in all these different countries is probably one of the plans that was drawn up, and probably true. Yeah, and Israel, there's no secret Israel wants a regime change. Israel wants a country that doesn't chant death to Israel every single day, that's basically trying to roll up their their country for a war one day with Israel, where they say they're going to wipe it off the map, and also, by the way, America. But from Israel's perspective, 100% I understand why they want a regime change, because they want somebody like who was there before 79, who doesn't exist just to annihilate them. But so, firstly, Konstantin answered everything Piers Morgan threw at him when it came to the uranium, because so why? Why do they need, if you only need 3 to 5%, why are they enriching it now to 60%? Dave couldn't answer that. So Dave says, yeah, obviously they're enriching it as a deterrent so that they can get a nuclear, so they could scare everyone off from going to war with them, because everyone knows that it's going to be easy, they're going to be close to having a nuclear weapon. So at what point is Israel then justified to take out that threat? According to Dave, it's never, because you have to wait till they actually physically have it in their hand, where, like in North Korea and in Pakistan, in these places where it's too late and you just can't do anything about it, and they become, like in the case of North Korea, rogue states that you just have to live with them. And unlike North Korea, Iran has an Islamist ideology basically behind the whole regime. They are jihadis, where North Korea doesn't even have that. North Korea does not even have the Islamist element to it, whereas Iran does. So Israel, the world, we should all listen to Dave Smith, who says, let Iran get a hold of the deterrent. But the only reason that it is a deterrent, the only reason why getting it to that point would be a deterrent, is because the world knows that it would take them weeks to get a hold of a nuclear weapon, to arm themselves with a nuclear weapon. And then they go, hello guys, we have a nuclear weapon, there's nothing you can do now. Dave wants us to get to that. Who is closer to a nuclear weapon capability, Israel or Iran? Israel has nukes, yes. What's your point? Israel doesn't stand there for the last 40 years chanting death to Iran or death to anyone else. There is a massive difference between Iran, who holds rallies, the regime hold mass rallies chanting death to Israel and death to America. So if you don't see the difference between arming an insane Islamist regime and Israel, who's had nuclear weapons for many, many years and has never even indicated of using it. Iran says they're going to wipe Israel off the map this week. They just don't have the ability to do it. Israel has the ability to wipe half the Middle East off the map, but they could wipe Iran off the map. One, they don't say it. They never say that. And two, they just don't do it. Dean, nobody's deleting messages. Settle down. Dean, settle down.
They were developing nukes, which they're not. Truman knew that the Soviets were developing nukes. He didn't launch an aggressive war against them for it. And Johnson knew that Mao Zedong was developing nukes. He still didn't launch an aggressive war against the country. And the point is that you could sit here and say, just like they did with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, you could sit here and say, no, we're just going to have a no-fly zone. We won't have boots on the ground. We won't have this. Look, Iran has already demonstrated, in a few days that this war has been going on, that they're more capable than all of the other countries we picked on in the terror wars. They've already hit Israel and killed people there. What's going to happen when a few Americans get killed? Hopefully this doesn't. But what's going to happen if that happens? What do you think Donald Trump's going to do?
Many of us can.
Well, according to Dave and according to what see, they keep moving they're shifting the goalpost, because Dave and Tucker and Candace Owens, all these experts, basically said if Israel striked Iran, then there was going to be mass casualties to American I think it was American bases, and as well as Israel. It was going to be a mass casualty event targeting Israel, but also American things in the area, so American bases and whatever. And none of that came to fruition. Nothing happened. So yeah, Iran has more successfully than anyone else targeted Israel. The missiles that have actually gotten through, so 95% of the missiles they've managed to knock out, thank God. But the ones that did get through have caused more damage than Israel has pretty much ever sustained from this kind of war, these kind of wars, right? So from, you know, if you think about the first Gulf War, and then obviously all the years from Gaza, the rockets, and then even from October 7, when from Lebanon, so Israel has sustained more damage from single rockets than any other point in time. But and this war in particular, the war against Iran, Israelis have feared for a long time. Like the Israeli population, this is the one war they knew was inevitable at one point, but they feared the worst. I think people are waking up now going, okay, this is bad. These are bad. We've got to stop them. And we can see them. They're kind of, you're starting to see them, their capacity, their capability for whatever reason. Some people are saying that Israel's knocked out. Well, Israel's saying they've knocked out a bunch of their capability, their missile launches, but others are saying that they've also gone through about 20 or 30% of their arsenal, so they're slowing it down. Whatever it is, I think we can see now that Iran does not, at present, have the capability to do anything Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, all these clowns promised us they would. They acted like it was going to be Armageddon the moment Israel struck. None of that happened. And I can tell you this now, he's not as confident. So he's very shifty with his words as to what is exactly going to happen if America, for example, strikes that nuclear facility beneath the mountain, the one that they need, or they say that the most effective way would be Israel's bunker busting bomb. He's like saying he knows at this point, because he committed to the argument the whole time up until now that if Israel strikes, there's going to be a massive catastrophe in the Middle East. This is going to be World War III. This is going to be the start of World War III. When in fact Israel wiped off the whole top brass of the Iranian military, the nuclear scientists, their infrastructure. Like, Israel devastated so much of their capabilities and their top brass, and what did they get in return? Yeah, they killed a few Israelis, civilians. They fired these rockets into civilian random air, indiscriminate bombing, hypersonic missiles that are just killing civilians. But the scale of it is, firstly, they haven't been able to effectively get anyone in Israel's military or infrastructure, nothing. It's just been targeting and hitting innocent civilians, which is horrible and sad, but it is nothing compared to what Dave Smith, up until Israel took out that preemptive strike, it is nothing compared to what he promised us or warned us or threatened us. We're screaming from the hilltops that this is going to happen. So I wouldn't take anything Dave Smith predicts about what will happen if America strikes seriously either. And I guarantee he'll move the goalposts there as well. A lot of Jews moved to USA and made non-ethnic names so they could live, save quiet lives. I don't know what you must be referring to Dave Smith. Yeah, whatever.
That is an amazingly big question. Konstantin, your response to that?
Well, it's fascinating. So the Iranians are willing to negotiate, but the negotiations aren't going anywhere. That's a very strange way of looking at it. Look, there's so much to address there, Piers. First of all, you've got to think about this and understand this from an Israeli perspective in the situation. A lot of people think that Israel has just launched the war on Iran. That's not how Israel sees this at all. Israel has been at war with Iran since October the 7th, when an Iranian proxy, Hamas, attacked them. On October the 8th, an Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, began to fire rockets into Israel. Then the Houthis, another Iranian proxy, began to attack shipping and also Israel, right? Now, what has happened?
Yeah, Fordo, sorry. Thank you. Fordo Enrichment Plant, Rock Boy.
Then is Israel has eliminated those threats to, I was going to say deballed, but decapitated Hezbollah. They dealt with the threat of Hamas, and they are now in a position to deal with the threat they've always been concerned about. Now, why is Israel so concerned about this? Well, first of all, Iran has been saying for a very long time, they don't want regime change in Israel. They want the state of Israel not to exist. Now, think about the fact that in the post-October 7 world, They cannot take the risk that they're only enriching uranium to 60% because they want to threaten to have nuclear weapons. That is not something they can do. And by the way, Piers, there's something that people don't seem to understand about. We struggle in the West. I really do think we all struggle in the West to understand the fundamentalist mindset. And let me give you an example of what the regime in Iran is like so that we can all understand what the threat here is. After the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran in 79, the war broke out between Iran and Iraq. And in that war, Iran was at a disadvantage. It was militarily backward. It wasn't financially able to deal with that. And you know what they did? They attempted to mitigate that by recruiting as many child soldiers as they could. We don't know how many because they didn't bother to count, but it's hundreds of thousands. And because some of them were too young and too weak to fight, they didn't send them to the front line. They sent them to sweep minefields with their own bodies. That is what this regime does. Now, if those people are willing to do that to their own children, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, what do you think they would do to the children of their enemies if they get a nuclear weapon or if they get close to it, or if they're allowed to continue funding proxies around the Middle East in order to attack Israel as they've already done?
Dave Smith.
Okay, can I respond to some of this, Piers? Because as I always insist when I come on your show, ironically, I get called a moral relativist when I criticize Israel, but I'm the one who's always asking for an objective standard here that we can judge all sides on. Because it's just, you can just focus on the horrible things that Iran did in the 1980 war with Iraq, which Saddam Hussein launched, and the U.S. backed Saddam Hussein as he was using chemical weapons. And
so that justifies using children to walk into minefields?
No, that is not what I'm saying.
Okay,
let
so
me
what
finish
are you
my point here. Instead of just strawmanning, well, I was about to say, so let me finish it. Okay, by the way, Israel never killed any children, as you know, Piers, right? They have the most
Israel is not sending its own children into minefields. It's a massive difference.
Okay, Konstantin, let me finish my point, and then you can respond to it and see if you can take it on. Now, when you sit here and say that they've been at war with Iran since October 7th because Hamas is their proxies. What exactly, proxy means that I would think you have operational control over them or something like that.
Well, actually, let me explain what I think that means, because I've been arguing that point in terms of understanding where Israel comes from on this, which is there can be no doubt, I don't think, Dave, you would cast doubt on this, that Iran has financially and militarily given active and sustained support for a number of years to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, and to Hamas.
Hold on, is Piers Morgan realizing that even Dave Smith, his debating partner, is going too far on trying to pretend like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis and the Assad regime were not their proxies?
You wouldn't dispute that. Right. So, Piers, then by your logic and Konstantin's logic, is Israel our proxy? They just attacked Iran.
Well, I would say that Israel is actually, you could well argue, given the amount of support that America gives Israel militarily and economically, yes. I think,
fine.
One person's ally is another person's proxy.
Can I make some points on this?
Hold on, let me just...
Yeah, so I think ally, proxy,
can I flesh out your... Dave, I'm very happy to hear a counter-argument. Can I just flesh out Piers' point a little bit, if that's okay? So here's what we know. According to the State Department's own figures, Iran gives Hamas about $100 million a year. Latest figures. They've been funding Hamas since the early 1990s. Yahya Sinwar said in 2017 that Iran is the single biggest military and financial backer of Hamas's military wing. In September 2023, a month before October the 7th, 500 Hamas fighters and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters were being trained by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard abroad. I can't remember if it's in Lebanon or in Iran proper. And there are numerous chronicled, documented meetings between senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Hamas and Hezbollah fighters in the lead up to it. What do you think they were doing? Talking about world peace and swapping hummus recipes? This is something that they've been involved in very heavily, and they continue to be involved in. And Hamas and Hezbollah are the sword hanging over Israel's neck that Iran has used in order to prevent the very thing that's happening now.
Dave?
Okay, so to be clear here, it's an outrage that Iran has sold weapons and given money to Hamas, and therefore Hamas is their proxy. Yet, as we all know, Piers, and me and you have discussed this, 2 weeks before October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu sends the head of Mossad to Qatar to make sure that the funding to Hamas continues. Yet, is Hamas now a proxy of Israel? Is Israel at war with itself?
Well, I think on that point, I certainly think that Benjamin Netanyahu, when this is all over, is going to have a monumental day of reckoning, not just in the corruption courts, but I think he's going to have a monumental day of reckoning.
So hold on. So Dave Smith's argument is, I love how he jumps around like this. So let's unpack it a second. So he's saying that, so the fact that he's comparing the fact that Iran funds and sells weapons and trains all those terrorist groups who share their ideology. That's the important point here. They share their ideology. The ideology is an Islamist, wipe Israel, kill the Jews, wipe Israel off the map and kill the Jews. Some of them say just in Israel, the rest of them say around the world. So, and that's two of their proxies at least. I don't even know. Maybe Iran. I don't know where Iran stands on that. They definitely say wipe Israel off the map. So he's comparing that to Bibi Netanyahu allowing the funds from Qatar. So it's Qatari money that was meant to be funding the government, because Hamas was the government up until October 7 was the government since they got voted in 20 years ago. No, they never had another election, but because he was encouraging Qatar to keep their money flowing, I don't even know what the thing was. That you're telling me is the same thing. So nothing to do with ideology, nothing to do with training militarily, nothing to do with any of the other points. That's what makes him a proxy. No. Was it right? Exactly what the Netanyahu government was, how the Netanyahu government was playing the whole Qatar, Hamas funding thing. I don't even know exactly how it worked, and clearly it wasn't right, because October 7 ended up happening, and a lot of that is only possible because of the funding. But it's not Israeli funding, it was Qatari funding. And if Israel didn't allow the funding in, the money which was supposed to be helping the government of Gaza to function. That's what the money was. It wasn't for terrorism. It was supposed to be helping them. It was aid to help them function. So if you're comparing the two, if Israel didn't allow that funding to go through, people like Dave Smith would be saying they're committing a genocide for not allowing them to even have money. Israel doesn't even let them have money to survive, to be able to govern in freely. So there's nothing Israel could do that's right. And when Israel does something like that, he'll compare it to Iran actually creating essential military forces, armies. So Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north. He'll compare it. They're the same thing according to... It's just nonsense arguments.
How he allowed this to happen on his watch, how Mossad so spectacularly dropped the ball.
Dory, I would happily debate, but if you can believe this, Babette has less of a clue than Dave Smith on these subjects.
No one can give me a good explanation for why they can carry out this kind of attack on Hezbollah with the pages and carry out so precise an attack in Iran, but didn't know...
Okay, this is the one of 3 or 4 arguments that Piers Morgans makes. How Israel was so successful. No one has been able to tell him, even though people have answered that numerous times to his face. He just doesn't accept the truth. He doesn't like the answer. The reason why Israel has so effectively been able to do targeted strikes on Hezbollah, so he's talking about the pager operation that he thought was so fantastic, which, by the way, people like Dave Smith condemned as a war crime. So it didn't make them happy anyways. But just to Piers's argument, the reason why they were able to do that is one that Gaza is a densely populated area in which Hamas purposely, intentionally built their entire terror network below hospitals, below schools, below apartment buildings, embedded in the civilian population. Then in Lebanon, there is much more space, and in Iran even more so. So it wasn't. There were embedded things within in Hezbollah, and that's why I think a couple of kids did get killed. But and some of the houses that were targeted, they were homes. So they did flatten houses at times when Hezbollah chose to embed themselves in the behind their population, behind civilians, and that is part of their terrorist strategy. The other point here is Israel. So he keeps saying, Mossad was able to do these targeted strikes in Lebanon and in Iran. Why couldn't they do that in Gaza? Because firstly, the Mossad don't operate in Gaza. That's the Shin Bet. It's a different organization. So maybe the Mossad's just much more effective. Fine, we can accept that. But they don't work in Gaza. It's like the FBI and the CIA. They're like the CIA. They're not allowed to work in the States. So firstly, it's different organizations. Now, if you're saying why couldn't they have the capability to do the same, is because I think the Shin Bet, from what's clear in that period of time, the Shin Bet and the army resources that Israel had, instead of focusing on the Gaza Strip, which they thought they had closed off because they were relying heavily on state-of-the-art technology, like the fences, the cameras, and all the setup that they had. So Israel relied on that and put their resources in fighting in the West Bank, because the West Bank, you have like what Gaza used to be, where there are towns, there are Jewish towns, and then there are Arab villages. So there's Arab and Jewish villages, and there was drama there. It kept being hot. That's a whole other discussion. The point is they moved the resources in there, and that's why a lot of time when you look at the West Bank, it is a lot more targeted and precise, because they have been doing that. They've been taking that threat so seriously that they've really built the intel in the West Bank. In Gaza, they didn't. So firstly, they didn't have the kind of years of intelligence. And when you're talking about years of intelligence, you look at the Beeper operation, they say that they set that up 10 years ago. So that it was a 10-year plan that they executed on that one particular, although over those 2 particular days. Iran has been years as well. The drone base that they set up in Iran was also years ago. In Gaza, they didn't. They just looked at Hamas as a violent group of cavemen that don't have any real threatening capability aside from these rockets that they built, the Iron Dome, and then they relied on the sophisticated border technology that allowed. And I worked on that border, so I know what even 20 years ago when I was there, I know what the technology even 20 years ago was doing. They would essentially, it would warn you, and then so if somebody touched the fence, it would give them a notification. The cameras would hone in on it, and then the resources, the military resources, would come there and deal with. So I would come to the fence, and if it was terrorists, we would engage them. If it was somebody with the white flag, we would bring them in over the fence and hand it over to the Shabak or whatever intelligence thing. So the point is, then what happened on October 7 is, all those resources that are supposed to respond to that had been, well, firstly, it was a Jewish holiday, so it's always lower resources unless it's at a time of war. They were all, the bulk of the resources were focused in the West Bank. So those that came to respond got overrun quickly. It was an intelligence failure, 100%. But why Israel can't execute this war in Gaza in the same way, as in target just the Hamas leaders and pinpoint, is because they didn't have the intelligence, and it's a different battlefield. Anyways, hope that makes sense.
Didn't apparently know that Hamas was spending 20 years building a tunnel system, and didn't know 3,000 of them were about to pour over the border. I will never defend Netanyahu in this. I think he's going to be a busted flush.
Mr. Rude Boy, where were the regular police? The regular armed police fought on October 7. I went to, let's say, Sderot, which is close by, one of the towns where the terrorists went through. Almost the whole police force was wiped out. There were 1 or 2 courageous cops that survived. So you don't know what you're talking about.
Sees this attack on Iran as being a chance to avoid being a busted flush for a little longer than it might have been the case. But there's going to be a day of reckoning for him. And the fact that he actively encouraged billions of dollars to be funneled to Hamas to create a divide and rule strategy between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority has also turned out to be one of the most catastrophically wrong things that an Israeli leader could possibly have done. So, look, that's where I sit with Netanyahu.
None of this makes Hamas an Israel proxy. Right?
Okay, fine. Well, yeah, I mean, it did kind of by the definition you guys gave me.
They're not the primary source of their funding support.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, it's got to be primary, just being, okay, fine, whatever. Anyway, the point is this, right? Obviously, right now, Israel has taken out...
Not whatever, Dave Smith. There's a big difference between the two things. I get that it doesn't suit his argument. There is a massive difference between what you can argue was bad policy by Benjamin Netanyahu to help the funds get through from Qatar, but it is not the same thing. Completely different thing than actively going out of your way to train and arm and fund those terrorist proxy groups that share your ideology. Israel does not share Hamas's ideology. That is suicide. It makes zero sense.
much of the Hezbollah leadership. The Houthis have been bombed. I think there's still a bit of a problem for them. They've been absolutely leveling Gaza. And so they think this is the moment. And of course, Bashar al-Assad fell as well. So now they think this is the moment for regime change in Iran. It's the same reason why people like Ben Shapiro were celebrating when Bashar al-Assad fell. Now the Shiite crescent is no longer supplying weapons from Iran to Hezbollah. But I'm not an Israeli. I'm an American. I'm not cheering when the emir of al-Qaeda takes over in Syria. And listen, whatever you put the risk at here, which if this thing keeps escalating, the risk of this going to a real ground war, another war in the war on terrorism, let me be very clear when I say this. I don't know that America will survive this. We went into the terror wars in a much stronger place than we're going into this one. And this is a much tougher opponent than Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi. We didn't go into the terror wars $37 trillion in debt. We didn't go into the terror wars with the cultural and political and racial divides. We have mass protests in the streets right now over Donald Trump trying to enforce his immigration policy. This is going to be, this has the potential to be an utter disaster. And why should any American or British person for that matter, why should any of us support this war? Because Israel thinks it's in their interest. Israel has attacked
I would argue, I would argue it's not just in Israel's interest. I think Iran is an evil regime that oppresses its people, that has funded terrorism.
So was Saddam Hussein.
Well, yeah, I agree. But in Saddam Hussein's case, I never believed.
Saddam Hussein never funded terrorism.
Well, I never believed that Saddam Hussein had WMD. I think the difference
there was no terrorism in Iraq until we got rid of Saddam, actually.
Tax day has passed, but for millions of Americans.
Yes, that was funny. Those arguments, it's funny to watch. The only time Piers steps in against Dave is when he says something so insane that even he can't sit there. He just doesn't want to be seen on camera because, to Piers' credit, he was against the Iraq war, but completely different thing. And the idea that you don't need to support it, you can say that you don't want your country to be involved. I don't even that's a fine argument. But to say you don't support the war, like you don't think Israel has a right, and that's what Dave Smith is really arguing, that Israel is wrong to even try fight Iran because they don't really pose a threat to him. And that is where Dave Smith is full of it. He's full of it on most of these points anyways. But Israel has a right to make sure, Israel has not only a right, a duty to make sure that Iran never gets hold of a nuclear weapon because of the real threat that they pose to Israel. And Americans also have a duty to protect their own country from a regime that calls for their destruction, and the responsibility is to ensure that they never get any capability to be able to carry out any of their fantasies. Right now, yes, it's fantasies, and you can see clearly it's fantasies because when they are actually confronted by Israel, they're getting some missiles and hitting a bunch of civilians. They're not actually able to create to cause real damage to the Israeli regime.
Not the IRS.
No. I'm sorry. Just to be clear, I said that before I heard Piers Morgan make that point. I was saying about being a brutally oppressive, oppressive dictator.
I think you can't hold any truck for this Iranian regime. I think a lot of Iranian people would agree with that. I think they would love to get rid of them. I think that Israel has
unlike
every
the
right
Iraqis,
to feel threatened by Iran's tentacles in the way they supported 3 different terror groups right on their border. So I'm not saying that you're not right, that this might all backfire.
Let me just ask you.
I'm not saying it may not backfire. I'm just saying I do understand why Israel has decided to do it now. I think they sense that Iran's regime has never been weaker because of what's happened in Syria, because of what happened to Hezbollah. What's been the most significant moment of the last?
Organise a debate with me and Dave Smith. I'll do it. All right. He's not going to do. Dave Smith sees himself as Piers Morgan, Joe Rogan, Douglas Murray. I'm not in that league at all, but I would happily, unlike you, I will happily debate him. He ducks people like Destiny, and to be honest, to be fair, I don't like a lot of Destiny stuff, but Destiny is far more intelligent and can prosecute his position on this conflict far better than Dave Smith. Dave is an emotional. He argues like a lefty when it comes to these discussions. He's not serious.
Probably Hezbollah saying we're not getting involved in this. right? So, I mean, that to me was a very significant moment. And that may well have emboldened not just Israel to continue pummeling Iran, but also may have emboldened Trump to think, well, actually, if we're ever going to deal with this regime, now is the moment. Now, that's not to say, Dave, that you're not right. That this could all backfire horrendously. And if America gets sucked into a ground war, then it will be a complete nightmare. I've got no doubt about that.
Yes, but would you also concede, though, that if you allow Iran to enrich uranium, that also could backfire?
Yes, right? I was about to say that. And also I was about to say that Russia is now making pretty worrying noises that if America gets involved, it's not going to tolerate it. So you can't ignore that, given what's happening in Ukraine. But yeah, I think in your point, Konstantin, yes, when I saw that IAE report, I read it and I thought they'd gone from 3% to 60% uranium enrichment. And there's only one reason you would do that. Either you take Dave's view, which is they're doing that because they want to have a form of nuclear deterrent without actually having a bomb. Or if you're Israel, you're like, these people have been funding terrorism against us for decades. And now they've gone from 3% to 60%, way more than is needed for any civilian use. Clearly, they are on a fast track here to be a nuclear power. And we cannot allow that to happen. So I do, well, let Konstantin respond first, but that's why I do understand why Israel feels the way it does.
Well, exactly. And let's be honest about something here, Piers. The three of us are sitting in comfortable air-conditioned studios on the other side of the world from the region where this is happening. We have the luxury to pontificate about the real reason that Iran is enriching uranium to near weapons grade. Israel does not have the ability to get this wrong and then go, well, I apologize, I got this one wrong, as Dave has done with President Trump. He supported him being elected, and now he's I got it wrong.
Thought on Mehdi Hassan. He's basically a more sophisticated version of Dave Smith and knows more.
Let's impeach him. Israel, if it gets this wrong, gets annihilated. They do not have the luxury of that. Now, Dave, I think the point you make about the American people, I have the greatest respect for the American people, and they should determine the course of America themselves. They've elected Donald Trump, and that is the reality. No one here, Piers found out, I think, with some history, that Americans don't like being told what to do by foreigners, and I'm certainly not going to do that. It's up to the American people. I know the American people don't want boots on the ground, and neither do I. And neither do sensible people, I think. I think the extent of Americans' involvement should be to help Israel defend itself against the missile attacks and let them get the job done themselves. I agree with you. This is Israel's war. They should prosecute it to the best of their ability, and they should deal with the threat that they face from Iran. I don't want a massive involvement of the West. I don't think that's what we need. And by the way, Piers, just one quick point, slightly tangential, but not necessarily important. For those people who care about what's happening in Ukraine, this is brilliant for Ukraine because Iran has been one of the biggest suppliers of drones, the suicide drones that have been raining down in Ukrainian cities and killing civilians and military personnel there. The fact that Iran and Russia are now having to deal with this situation takes a lot of pressure off Ukraine, and it's good for that reason as well.
All right, Dave, the one thing I would quibble with about what you said earlier was about...
I don't care which side of the argument you sit on. My title of this video is 100% true. He is destroying them. Every argument Konstantin is making is on point. Dave Smith is an emotional wreck that doesn't actually, when you unpack his arguments, they're of no substantial thing. He's a entitled little thing in his studio where he wants to dictate to Israel how they can defend themselves. Israel has every right to fight this. Dave Smith, step aside. Fine, say that you don't want America to get involved. I don't even have a problem with that. I have a faith in Israel doing it themselves. I also call out the bullshit when Dave Smith acts like if America does get involved in the way that they're discussing, which is not boots on the ground, nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to touch America. In fact, if anything, America's going to be able to take credit, and it's going to be power. It's going to be a peace through strength because they know, unlike the Obama years, America actually stands up for its principles. But I don't care. If you're an American and you don't want them to get involved even to that degree, don't. Israel can handle it. Israel can absolutely handle it, and that's what they've shown over since October 7. Look at what happened. Look what happened since October 7. They've taken out... Hamas is a former shell of itself. Unfortunately, they need to... Because there are hostages in there and they need to get rid of Hamas's whatever control within the Gaza Strip. That still continues. But they've destroyed Hamas. They've annihilated Hezbollah. Assad fell because of their successes. And now, in 1 week, they've brought Iran to their knees. And what's happened in return? Nothing.
The way that Iran has responded. They always threatened annihilation when they get attacked, right? Or when they're involved in any kind of skirmish. We've heard it towards the end of last year and nothing really happened. We've heard it again now. And although, yes, they've got through the Iron Dome several times, they've killed some civilians in Tel Aviv. This is indisputable. So they technically have done better in terms of their revenge attack than other countries have fared against Israel. I accept that. But I also think we are far removed from seeing any kind of huge resistance coming out of Iran. In fact, what you're seeing is their bluff potentially getting called here, that a lot of it has been rhetoric built on sand, literally, and that they don't actually have the military capability to even tackle a country 1/10 its size in terms of population, let alone if the United States was to get involved.
I hate Dave Smith for making me agree with anything Piers Morgan says these days.
So I think what you're seeing is actually the opposite of the way you characterize.
But it was bound to happen because Piers Morgan says this and then says this, and sometimes they can be two conflicting arguments within a single sentence.
I don't think you're seeing a massive response from Iran. I think you're seeing as good as they can do, and it's not very much.
Well, look, I mean, this is what.
Australia should take on the... look, Australia's not getting involved. I think Israel's an ally. Australia's not getting involved in any military way. I think Australia needs to send a point that we stand up against terrorism, we stand up against Islamism. Our government's gutless, so they won't take any position, but what does it matter? Australia's not getting involved in any way, so it's inconsequential. And Israel will win. With or without America, Israel will win this because their survival depends on it.
To be seen, and we don't know. But in 2007, when Dick Cheney was trying to push George W. Bush into war with Iran, it was the Pentagon who stopped George W. Bush from doing it. And it was them who said that we do not have escalation dominance over Iran, essentially meaning that we have, we still have thousands of troops in Iraq right now. We have bases and embassies all throughout the region that they can touch. Now, we'll see, I guess, Piers. I guess we're going to play this game. I guess we're going to play this incredibly risky game.
I agree, it's high risk.
For no reason, essentially, from the United States of America's interests. And, look, this stuff, I'm sorry, I just find this to be too ridiculous. All of the intelligence is saying that they don't have nuclear weapons and they're not pursuing nuclear weapons. There is one country, one government in the Middle East that is not a member of the non-proliferation treaties that has nuclear weapons secretly. And it ain't Iran, it's Israel. It is so ridiculous.
Well, I agree, it's absurd. As you know, I agree. I agree. I don't understand how Israel is allowed to continue pretending they don't have nuclear weapons. Also,
they don't pretend like they don't have nuclear. Look at these two retards. They go, I don't understand what the difference is between Iran having nuclear weapons and Israel having nuclear weapons. Well, Israel's had it for years, and they've never chanted for the destruction of any other nation. Iran hasn't had it and has tried time and time again to destroy Israel. They've just failed through Hamas, Hezbollah, and even their proxies and the Houthis. They've failed every single time. So if they get hold of a nuclear weapon, that will be their first and last real chance.
But what are you saying? Are you saying Iran should develop nuclear weapons to compensate for that reality? Or
No. What I'm saying is this, okay? Whenever you guys talk about this, even already, and Piers, I got to say, I thought you were a little bit guilty of this right after October 7th, understandably perhaps so. But even right now, whenever we talk, it's all about the Israeli perspective, as if we're all Israelis. Oh, Israel can't take the risk that they have 60% enrichment. Israel can't get this wrong the way I could change my mind about supporting Donald Trump. I guess Israel can get it wrong when they lure America into a war, when they pump out propaganda saying that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. That's okay when they get that one wrong, but they can't get this one wrong. Okay, fine.
Why are you blaming Israel for that? It was your own government lying to us about that. I was protesting against the war in Iraq exactly the same way you and Piers.
I think we all oppose it.
But it was our government's lying to us. It wasn't about Israel. Why is everything that happens in the world the fault of Israel Day?
This is such a blatant straw man. I didn't say everything in the world is the fault of Israel. I'm saying they were also guilty of this.
But why are you putting the emphasis on them when George W. Bush and Tony Blair were using their bully pulpits to make this point to a far wider audience than some guy in the Middle East called Benjamin Netanyahu?
If you think that I am removing any of the blame from George W. Bush or Tony Blair, I assure you you're wrong and you don't know what you're talking about. I've been blasting them for years. They're war criminals who should be in the Hague.
I agree.
That is not the issue. We are talking specifically about the nation of Israel right now, so I'm talking about their responsibility. And why is it, by the way, that this is always a one-way street? I hear all the hawks constantly being like, Iran said this.
I hate these people. Like, it's like Tucker Carlson does that, Candace Owens does it, and Dave Smith do it. They make these points, like Tucker Carlson, the analogy yesterday was the same thing that he did was when they blame everything on AIPAC. And then when Ted Cruz goes, okay, but AIPAC doesn't actually control anything, and then gives the example of where AIPAC does, like where Tucker knows AIPAC is kind of like this weak little body that even within the Jewish community, we look at them as like they're weak. but they've been harping on for a good 8 months about how AIPAC controls the entire Congress, and almost every politician in America is funded and controlled by AIPAC. And then when Tucker goes to him, well, actually, no, look at this example. This is a perfect example where AIPAC clearly is not very strong. He goes, yeah, I know. I'm not saying they control everything, but dude, you've spent the last year or 8 months saying they do control everything. Dave Smith here is literally trying to blame Israel for the lies that were fed to the British population, the American population, by their own leaders. He's trying to say that was Israel. And then when he gets called up on it, he goes, oh, no, that's not what I was saying. He always makes that argument. He does. He goes, no, that's not what I'm saying. Well, wait, if you think that I don't condemn them as well, then you're deluded. Well, you didn't bring them up now. You literally blamed Israel for the thing that your government did to you.
Threatened this. What about the threats in the other direction? Maybe Iran feels like they don't have a choice to not. So look, Muammar Gaddafi, Iran is on.
Show me, Dave Smith, show me one video where you have the Israeli regime running rallies of tens of thousands of people shouting death to Iran. And then we can discuss about the threat that Israel poses to Iran. And the other difference is Israel has had the capability to strike Iran heavily for many years, and they haven't done so. They've never done it. Whereas Iran hasn't, and they've tried again and again and again through their proxies. So now you want them to be armed with something that allows them to... Mate, the reason why you need to shut up is you can't tell Israel they can't defend. Dave Smith is not making the argument. He's not only making the argument that America shouldn't get involved. He's making the argument that the whole war that Israel is prosecuting on their own against Iran is wrong. And that's where Dave Smith needs to shut up. He can say what he wants about America not getting involved, but when you start telling Israel that they have no right to defend themselves because of this moral equivalence, then it means that it devalues all your other actually potentially legitimate arguments.
The list of 7 countries that are supposed to be overthrown. The U.S. government went and overthrew both of their next door neighbors, invaded the countries and destroyed them after putting Iran on the axis of evil list when they had nothing to do with 9/11. And then when Muammar Gaddafi denuclearized, they went in there and overthrew him in the most violent, brutal way, was sodomized to death by a pack of madmen. Maybe Iran also feels that they can't get this one wrong. Why are we doing this? This is a country that poses no threat to the United States of America. And if you guys want to try to hang on the fence here and go, hey, I'm not telling Americans what to do, I think Israel should do it on their own. But that's just a fantasy land. They're not doing it on their own. They're doing it with our weapons, with our intelligence support, with our money, with us protecting them from a retaliation strike, and, at least possibly, with our president using negotiations to dupe Iran into thinking that they weren't at risk. I mean, that's what Benjamin Netanyahu says, and that's what some other reporting says. Maybe that's not the case, but either way, he pretended like he was afterward. So no, none of this is being done without America. This is about a regime change war. All of them said it in their own words. They're on record. Do you guys think Benjamin Netanyahu has been mistaken for 30 years, claiming that Iran is a year to 3 years away from a nuke? Or was he lying?
Well, I think, listen, I think the reality...
So again, look... This is the problem with Dave Smith, that you can argue some of the points that he's making, that you don't want US involvement if you're an American taxpayer, and you can prosecute the argument that as to why it's not actually in America's interest to go up against Iran. I disagree with it, just because it's clear that Iran views America as an enemy as well. So I don't know how allowing them to gain a nuke is in America's interest, but whatever, you can. But it's not. He does that while also saying that Israel has no right to defend itself. Make that point, fine. I don't even have a problem with that. Dave Smith, make the point that America, you don't want America involved because you don't think it's actually a real threat to America. But Israel has the absolute moral duty, not only the right, has a moral duty to defend its own citizens. They shouldn't take Dave Smith's word that the fact that Iran has 60% uranium when they only need it at 3 to 5% is just because they want a deterrent. So they should rely on Dave Smith, the geopolitical expert, and put the lives of 8 million of their citizens in the hands of Dave Smith, because he's pretty sure that Iran is not going for a nuclear weapon. They're just enriching uranium to threaten nuclear war. Like, it's just so retarded.
The thing that struck me was going from 3% to 60% suggests an intent. It suggests an incontrovertible. No one disputes.
They're not the only country that does this.
But nobody disputes that Iran has gone from 3% to 60% in uranium enrichment, right? So that is all. Unlike with Saddam and the WMD that didn't exist, that is indisputable.
Exactly.
It's just how you interpret what they're intending to do with
Piers
that.
is on this
let me
side
ask you,
now.
Can I just one quick thing on this? So first of all those regime wars you're talking about are the fault of the US and other Western governments who pursued them. That's who's responsible. That's who should be to blame, and as you say, should be prosecuted for that. But the reason people rightly call you a moral relativist, Dave, is that you don't seem to understand the difference between, yes, I think it's quite clear that Benjamin Netanyahu wants regime change in Iran, but that is not the same as the regime in Iran wanting to destroy Israel. There's a big difference. If the mullahs in Iran wanted a different prime minister of Israel, that is not the same as wanting to destroy their entire country. And the reason Israel is as paranoid about these things as it is, let's be honest, it's surrounded, or at least was until recently when opinion in many Arab countries changed towards Israel, thanks to President Trump's Abraham Accords. Israel...
Konstantin is a boss. I love him. I haven't always agreed with him. Sometimes he's annoyed me in some interviews, but God bless him, because he's answering, and I'm glad we're watching this at 1.25 because otherwise it would drive me nuts. If you watch the whole, like up to now, we're 42 minutes into it, Dave Smith goes on these emotional rants. Everything's an emotional argument, and then Konstantin just comes back calm, as somebody says, calm as a cucumber, with actual facts that destroy everything that Dave Smith is saying. The internet. The thing is, and that's why people get so triggered by the what I've called this video, is the internet will act like Dave Smith won because he's shouted some popular buzzwords at Konstantin, and yes, he won. He said it. He said what we're all thinking. But when you listen to the substance of it, again, like in Douglas Murray's case, although I think that Konstantin here is actually doing much better because he's not playing that point that Dave Smith was able to use or did his victory lap for about 6 months on. He's treating him like a normal human being. He's treating him like an equal, which, to be honest, after watching this, they're not even in the same league.
Surrounded by many, many countries who don't believe that it has a right to exist. And that's the difference. And that's why people call you a moral relativist.
Well, okay, well, that's totally ridiculous and makes no sense
Why?
at all. And it only works.
By
I'm
definition.
about to answer, Konstantin. Let me finish. Because it only makes sense when you only say, I ascribe the worst of intentions to this regime and the best of intentions to this. What was overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi? Was that simply replacing the leader, or was that destroying the country, turning it into a failed
You've
state?
brought in a different conflict. Let's stick to Israel and Iran.
No.
The Israelis say we want regime change. The Iranians say we want to wipe you off the map. Like, that's pretty different.
Hold on. So I'm the moral relativist.
Yes.
But then when I point out what one side actually did, you run away from it and say, oh, no, we can't talk about that.
It's your government that destroyed Libya. It's not Israel. It's your government.
Know anything about this? Israel was lobbying for us to do this for years.
Who made the decision to do that?
Our government, and I hold them criminally responsible.
So blame them.
Yes, Konstantin, why are you an Israeli? Why are you constantly running cover for them?
Because I believe in speaking the truth and being honest instead of dragging in stuff that's irrelevant.
No. It's not irrelevant at all. What are you talking about? Yes, my government is criminally responsible for the wars that they launched. And the Israeli government is also responsible for constantly trying to lure my government into more wars. That's what I'm standing up against right now.
So the American government is so gullible that they just go around invading countries on the say-so of Israel.
Again, what a straw man, dude. Benjamin Netanyahu came to America in 2002 and testified before Congress that the U.S. should overthrow Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and the Iranian regime. This isn't a secret. He's advocating that we fight more wars. And I'm telling you that this war, which we do not need to fight, which is not in our interest, has the potential to be devastating to our country, let alone the region. What is the moral relativism in it?
Ask him how. The moral relativism is the fact that you're comparing. So you have to use all these other conflicts to justify your stance here when it's a clear question. One wants to destroy the entire other country. The other one wants a regime change. So that, in fact, they go out of their way to say they love the people of that country. One time, have you heard Iran saying they love the people of Israel? No, they say they want them all dead. So he has to revert back to things that his country did. That, yes, maybe was in Israel's interest as well. Israel was happy to see regime changes in places that the regime hated them. That's fine. Does that mean that they did it because Israel said to do it? No, that's just nonsense. Like, if that was true, it would be in the same way that this is playing out. Israel would target them and then say, join me in this fight. but they never happened in those wars.
The
What the moral
Iranians are good
relativism
people.
is. One side wants to wipe the other one from the map. The other side wants not to have people who want to do that in charge of that country.
But
That's
Piers,
the difference.
Piers, do you not get my? Let me just see, Piers. Do you get my point here? This is what they said from the very beginning of the war in Gaza. Israel doesn't want to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel just wants to retrieve the hostages and get it. But they are wiping it off the map. So why do you just get to have this standard where you decide what they want to do? I can't base it on their track record. We can't look at Iraq. We can't look at Libya. We can't look at Afghanistan. Evidently, as all the hogs can see, we can look at World War II. Everything is just like World War II. But it's not like the last 25 years.
I saw this was one of that was a little cut clip that I saw, and I think the context of it's so much more. It's so much more punchier because it just shows how Dave Smith had lost the argument. He realized he lost the argument with Konstantin, where Konstantin goes, "Why are you bringing all that in?" Like there's literally when you ask why people call you moral. People say that it's all moral relativism. Is the fact that you're comparing one country that wants to wipe Israel, wipe the other off the map, and the other one just wants regime change, and then his counter argument just doesn't make sense without bringing all these other conflicts in. So he turns around and he goes, Piers, doesn't it make sense what I'm saying? Piers, doesn't it make it's meant to be 2-on-1? Can you actually back me up here? That's exactly what happened. He couldn't. And that just proves to you that even Dave Smith is in this debate knowing that Piers is basically his debating partner instead of the moderator. And it is like by definition, Konstantin is right. Morally equating the two, where one wants just regime change, says they love the people of that country, they just don't like the regime that says they want them all dead, is the same as the regime that says they want the entire country gone. And especially when you look at the size of the country, you've got little tiny Israel, which is a dot on the map, and then you've got this fierce, this big, massive country that's saying, we want to kill you. That's why their rockets, their indiscriminate rockets that do get through, so the 5% that get through, that's why they cause any sort of devastation, because Israel is such a small country that wherever it lands, it's going to hit somebody. Almost wherever it lands, it's going to hit somebody. As in, when you go to Iran, you actually have to target properly, unless you fire rockets into like Tehran just indiscriminately, which Israel could just do as well, but they don't.
These guys have wiped countries off the map left and right.
Well, as you know,
it's their track record.
Yeah, as you know, I've been increasingly
Which
critical
country?
of the Israel strategy in Gaza. It makes no sense until you hear people like Smodrich talking brazenly and openly about ethnic cleansing. I mean, it doesn't make any pretense. And at that point, I do think that there are certainly people on that in that government at senior level who absolutely want to get all the Palestinians out of Gaza, out of the West Bank. And if that has been their plan all along from October the 8th, then I was duped, and people that feared that were correct. And we'll have to see how that plays itself out. I hope that is not going to actually be the case, and that people who say from these.
The fact is, nothing's changed since October 7. The only thing that changed was Piers saw the way that public opinion shifted and realized, like every single political issue he's ever gotten involved in, he's realized that he wants to be a part of it. So he shifts, and even within the conversation, like he wants both sides of the arguments. That's the only time he comes around to defending Israel is because he doesn't want to completely alienate that side. COVID is the perfect example of Piers, but nothing's changed in the conflict. And the fact that he keeps bringing up Smodrich, and he keeps bringing up, like literally, he has 3 or 4 arguments that he brings. Smodrich is one of them, who says outrageous stuff to his base in Israel of, extreme right, settlers, whatever. And some of it is outrageous rhetoric, but it is not Israeli policy. And a lot of Israelis, the vast majority of Israelis do not agree with Smodrich or whatever. And to say that the aim of Israel, so the plan of Israel was always to wipe Gaza out, is ridiculous. Because if Israel wanted to do that, why are they wasting 2 years doing it? They could have done it within 2 weeks. And the outrage would have been short and sharp, like ripping off a Band-Aid. And people would have still had the sympathy of October 7. So why didn't Israel do that? Because that was never the plan. That's not the plan. That's never been the plan. The fact that Smodrich says some outrageous shit but it's not Israeli policy. That's like saying, Pauline Hanson in Australia says something, or, even better examples is somebody like Payman, when she was part of the Labor Party, says some outrageous thing, and suddenly you're saying that that's the Labor Party's policy. It's not. There are individuals in the government that are trying to get re-elected in their own area, whatever, to their own constituents, and they say things that the majority of the country disagree with. It doesn't make it policy, and it is not Israeli policy. That's a lie.
Side, they say to me, well, Smotrich isn't the government. Well, he's a pretty senior member of that government, and he's not even hiding what he thinks should be happening. Before we finish this, guys, I want to talk about the politics here for Trump as well, because it's really interesting to me. Konstantin, you've got the conservative right in America absolutely split down the middle. You've got Tucker Carlson on one side, and a lot of people who agree with him that this could be a disaster for America, for Trump. He shouldn't be doing it. Obviously, Dave and Tucker Carlson, now unusual bedfellows on this, but there's always a first time for everything. But you also have a lot of people on the conservative right, Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, others who are absolutely gung-ho to get stuck into Iran here. Is there a danger that politically this really does fragment Trump's base support? And what does that mean for the Republicans, for MAGA, for Trump, for the future, for J.D. Vance and people who are aligned with Trump maybe at the next election and so on?
Well, I should preface this by saying I'm an outside observer in the United States. I do go there a lot. I spend a lot of time there. I speak to people there, but I certainly wouldn't claim to be, the greatest expert in the world about what's happening in America. My sense, unexpert sense of this, is that actually I think your presentation of it is a very online focused presentation. I think if you look at the polling, the vast majority of people in America are basically in the position I described earlier, which is they don't want Iran to get anywhere near or continue to get closer to developing nuclear weapons, and they don't want American boots on the ground. And that's the dilemma that Donald Trump has to navigate. And if he can do that...
Well, there's a third dilemma. You see, this is where it gets more complicated, because I don't think he's even thinking about boots on the ground, but I do think he is thinking probably as we speak about whether he allows an American B-52 to take a 30,000-pound bomb and drop it on the nuclear sites, which Israel hasn't got the ability to get to.
Yeah.
I think that is probably
more
likely.
I pray to God Israel takes out that nucleus without a B-52, some special forces on the ground. I just hope some amazing outcome to that, to shut people up like Piers Morgan who think they're experts on everything. I hope Trump is just buying time for it to happen, but whatever.
But not right now.
So let's be honest,
what he may order.
if that happens and it's successful and it doesn't lead to an escalation, everyone's going to love it, because Americans love to win and they love to bomb shit. Right? Let's be honest, that's the history of the last 20 years.
Yes.
And if that happens, they'll be very happy. And if it goes in a different direction, they will be very unhappy. So you're right, it's a big call. I don't think anyone sitting here, or frankly anywhere, knows how it's actually going to play out or whether it's a good idea. And I'm not sitting here advocating for that necessarily. I think Israel seems to be doing enough damage to significantly degrade any attempts Iran is making to have a nuclear enrichment program. And I hope that's the thing that we pursue. By the way, I don't think it's split MAGA down the middle at all. That's what it appears like on X. I really don't think when you talk to ordinary people that's the situation in America, especially in the Republican Party, which is overwhelmingly pro-Israel and has been for a very long time.
Okay, Dave Smith.
There's no question. I mean, I largely agree with Konstantin there. I think if Trump can thread the needle here and not lead to a catastrophe, that he can survive this politically. I do think he's downplaying the split a little bit. It's not just about like polls about how people feel about boots on the ground, which obviously the American people are largely opposed to. And yes, it is true that most of the Republicans do support Israel, although poll after poll has demonstrated that this is really changing with the younger generation. But look, I mean, you have a situation right now. And, yesterday, I started the day by denouncing Donald Trump, and I was, taking a lot, trending on Twitter and getting a lot of praise and a lot of insults and all that stuff. But by the end of the day, it was like Tucker Carlson was being insulted by Donald Trump for not even criticizing him, really just criticizing the policy while heaping praise on Donald Trump. But Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, I mean, some of the most influential conservative voices in the United States of America have all come out and really drawn a red line that we do not want to have another war here. So the point is that if it does get to that, and that's a big if, but if it does come to that point, like a real boots on the ground war, Donald Trump will absolutely destroy his coalition and his legacy along with it.
Absolutely. But that's not happening. So there is no way there's going to be boots on the ground. So and most of the people that he mentions that have gone up against Trump on this issue are all from the one part of the Conservative Party. Half of them have been challenging Trump on a bunch of stuff. They've been pushed out. They used to be in the inner circle. They're no longer in the inner circle. You got to you got to look at this stuff and evaluate it from the internal political thing within the Republican Party. Like there's internal politics as well. A lot of the names, not Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is the only one that's a bit surprising in there, but but his rhetoric is way less toned down. He actually supports Israel. He just does. He's taking the position of anti-war because I think that's a rhetoric that he feels that Trump ran on, and I feel like he's just misreading. He's misreading the room because he's falling into, because he's such an online personality, and he's probably feeling the wrath of the online kind of pushback to Trump on this from that corner of the. I'm not even going to call him the Republican Party, like people like Candace Owens and this Dave Smith, like they're all people that weren't actually old school Republicans. They're not Republicans at all. Like Dave Smith was up until late in Trump's campaign last year was talking about Trump getting impeached, and then he did a few months. He jumped on the winning bandwagon, and now he's calling for Trump to be impeached again. Like nothing's changed. Candace Owens was a Democrat, turned into a Republican, and then now she's like the boss of the Republicans. Whereas that strong Republican base have been there long before Candace Owens, and will be there long after Candace Owens is irrelevant. Freaking Tucker Carlson's like also the same. Look at him back in CNN. Like these are all people that they got pretty prominent within the Republican Party. But I think if you understand what's actually happening there, a lot of the real Republicans, not the online bots, not the Pakistanis backing him online, or even the extreme right in America, or even the Islamists in America that are backing all these people now online. The real core Republican Party overwhelmingly still supports Israel.
Well as his entire domestic agenda. I mean, you need as much political capital as you can get when there's people out on the streets protesting against his immigration policies. And he's risking squandering all of this for something that's absolutely no threat to the United States of America at all, on the side of the country who secretly developed nukes and is not in the non-proliferation treaty, against the country who doesn't have nukes and is in the non-proliferation treaty. It's
that happens to be
the
Israel.
Most reckless madness a policy could possibly be.
That happens.
Well, he's not pursuing that policy. This is what the point I keep making to Dave.
That happens. He just misses out the point that Israel happens to be just America's closest ally in the Middle East. Like it's a clown show. The way this comedian frames who Israel is compared to who Iran is.
You keep doing, Dave, is taking to the extremist position. No one's talking about boots on the ground except the usual Lindsey Grahams, who no one in the Trump cabinet takes seriously on these issues at all.
I don't know about that.
They don't. The conversation that's happening is about what is the right level of America's involvement. We will see what that is. And by the way, look, I haven't seen Charlie Kirk, who is genuinely influential, I think, within the MAGA movement, criticize President Trump. I think he's been kind of balanced in his commentary. All the other people, the Candace Owens, the Tucker Carlsons, etc., the vast majority of people within the conservative movement in America are not taking their opinion on this issue, and the polls bear that out.
Tucker, though,
I would say
Tucker, I think, is a significant voice.
People with huge audiences.
Well, I'm not saying they don't have huge audiences, but I'm saying a lot of those audiences are not within the conservative movement.
Right, but when Tucker chewed up Ted Cruz, for example, and did it pretty skillfully, I have to say, made Cruz pretty ill-informed about Iran. That's got a massive amount of mainstream media attention today.
You see, that's a problem with Piers Morgan, is he looks at things through the lens of views and online clicks and likes, and it is so revealing that Piers Morgan watched the Tucker Carlson, if he actually watched the whole thing, and he may have just watched the snippets that were shared by the Tucker fans online. But everything he views is from that perspective. Because if you honestly watched the Ted Cruz versus Tucker Carlson, it's a bit like this debate. Ted Cruz was far more informed than Tucker Carlson. Even there was a funny bit that I just saw now, is that I didn't even realize when Tucker Carlson tried to do a gotcha on Ted Cruz about where in the Bible he was referring to, and then Tucker acted like he was correcting him, and it turns out Tucker was wrong himself. He's just an arrogant, cocky fool, as opposed to Ted Cruz, who has absolute class. But that's why Piers Morgan looks at all these interactions as clicks, clickbait, viewers, likes, shares. It's all about the online world. He's living in the online world. He doesn't actually realize what's happening on the ground in America.
Yeah, I think that you can't ignore. I mean, it's interesting to me. Look at the split. The MAGA names against Trump: Candace Owens, you, Dave, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alex Jones, Matt Walsh, Tucker Carlson, obviously. Then you got the ones for Charlie Kirk's been pretty balanced, like you said, Lindsey Graham, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Mark Levine. I mean, I've not seen that kind of split on many issues. And this is potentially the biggest issue of all.
Can I just even responding to what Konstantin just said, because I thought I made this point pretty clear at the beginning, but let me try to make it clear. You can sit here and say nobody's talking about boots on the ground all you want to. This whole thing is about a regime change, and all of the major players have admitted this in their own words. Even Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't saying that Iran was on the cusp of having nuclear weapons.
That could be regime change. But Dave, that could be regime change, as we saw in Syria towards the end of last year in December, when after a long and bloody and awful civil war, suddenly the downfall of Assad happened incredibly quickly, and it did.
If you know anything about Iran, the regime change everybody's talking about is the people rising up. We've seen every couple of years the people in Iran who the vast majority dislike the Islamist regime come to the streets and try to uprise. It's quashed usually within a few weeks. When people are talking about regime change, they're talking about now, while the Iranian regime is on its knees and the population spark an uprising like they've done now, and that the regime cannot respond adequately, the regime change comes. Nobody serious is talking about boots on the ground. The only person talking about boots on the ground is Dave Smith, because he's trying to scare the American population out of supporting Israel. He's a scumbag.
Involve boots on the ground in a conventional sense. It involved actual Syrian boots from civilians.
That's right.
And they were able to say, and that's why I see, I don't think it can be ruled out that if enough Iranian people feel that their regime has been humiliated, has actually been exposed for not.
Piers is smart enough to know that he doesn't want this debate to come back and bite him in the arse. So I think that's where he's actually driven to step in at these points where Dave Smith says actually ridiculous things.
To hit back in the way they've always vowed to, feel that they're weak and disgraced and so on. Why couldn't there be an uprising like we saw in Syria at the end of last year? I don't think it can be ruled out completely.
Well, I mean, listen. So, Piers, just to be clear, because you are right about that, there are the models like Libya and Syria where it didn't require long occupations and nation building, and all you got was a failed state with open-air slave markets, a massive refugee crisis into Europe, and now you have Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria. And excuse me, as an American, my beef is with Al-Qaeda, not
but he's
with
not.
Hezbollah.
He is not. Look, he is not behaving like a member of Al-Qaeda. Now he's a leader of the country. He appears to be.
Oh, so that's okay.
I'm not taking any.
All right.
I'm not. Listen, I don't take any. As Donald Trump once says, I don't trust anyone. Right. So let's see how.
I'm not saying trust.
Let's see how it plays out.
Trust here. Hold on, Piers. I'm not saying trust. This man was fighting against America in the Iraq War,
I know his
part
history.
of the insurgents, killing our boys.
I know, but
so
look,
why am I supposed to care about the people
Nelson
who kill Israelis? But then I'm supposed to make up with.
Listen, Nelson Mandela was on the UK's prescribed terrorist list under Margaret Thatcher, and went on to become one of the greatest people in history and led his country to a more unified place. In other words, Trump is taking a bet that this new leader in Syria actually is a reformed character. And certainly, so far, you would have to say that the signs are reasonably encouraging, given the apocalyptic feelings that some people had, that he would simply be Mr. Al-Qaeda presiding over complete mayhem.
And one thing is worth adding, by the way, on this, is that Iran has a history. Iran, just a quick point, Dave, very quick. Iran has a history of 25 years or maybe 26 years of living in a secular and relatively liberal free society. So the people of Persia have a very different history to the countries you're talking about.
Exactly.
This is not to say that regime change or the change of a regime does not lead to catastrophe. I mean,
and there's no obvious, someone wrote a very good piece about this week. There is no obvious savior waiting in the wings other than the Shah's son, who is a quite divisive character. I've interviewed him, I like him personally, but divisive character. But there's no Mandela figure that you could point to and say is waiting in the wings to potentially come and rescue Iran. That person so far hasn't been identified.
Can I just make a couple quick points on this? Okay, so number one, we launched 25 years of what they are dubbed forever wars on the justification that Al-Qaeda came over here and murdered innocent American citizens. And now I'm supposed to make up with Al-Qaeda and forgive them for that because he put on a three-piece suit while...
You don't have to. It's irrelevant. It's not part of the conversation. The point that Konstantin made is a completely different situation. But sorry, Dave, it's annoying that you make me say this because I was, personally... I was very worried about the fact that the Al-Qaeda leader took over Syria. But like Piers says, so far, we haven't actually seen the kind of destruction that I thought it was going to bring. So time will tell. Who knows? Who knows how Syria is going to play out? But it is not the same situation. And Iran has never been in the same situation as those failed states for several reasons, including the culture of the Iranians. They're a smart, educated population that loves freedom. And they just got, in 79, they got screwed with this Islamic Revolution. And just look at their history prior to that. They've got an amazing, rich culture that hopefully, I do think that the Shah's son, if he comes up, we're going to see a really bright future for the Iranian people. Which Islamist? There's just like it's the only person that right now looks like he is going to take that position is the Shah's son. There isn't like some big Al Qaeda guy that's waiting to walk in there and take over. There's just nothing else. So, and I can't. And excuse me for not believing that somebody worse than the current Iranian regime's going to step in. Even the guy in Syria doesn't seem as bad as the Iranian regime right now. He has a very dark history, but right now we're not seeing it. Does that mean he's going to be good? I don't know. I am skeptical because he is a jihadi. I have a problem with jihadis, whether they're Sunni or Shia. But right now, Syria is looking a lot cooler than it was for a while, for many years there. So let it play out. But why are we talking about Syria? It's a completely different scenario. The only reason why Dave Smith is going back to Syria is because he can't argue the points of Iran.
I focus on Israel's enemies. I just find this to be like a crazy ask of the American people. And then, look, it's real easy to sit here and say, oh yeah, they had a strong tradition of liberalism and everything's going to work out this time. For the first time, we're going to have a regime change that's going to work out really smoothly. Iran is so weak. The people hate them so much. This regime has been in power since 1979, spending the vast majority of that time having the most powerful governments in the history of the world, hell-bent on ousting this regime. And they've survived this long. Maybe you guys are right this time. But Piers, come on, man. I mean, you remember the mission accomplished banners. You remember when they had the first elections in Iraq and it even fooled Jon Stewart and he was celebrating, oh, I guess George W. Bush was right. And then we went on to the most brutal and bloody 8 years of civil war that saw 1 million innocent people die. The country absolutely destroyed, massive displacements and horror stories. And so, it's like, I don't know if you guys have noticed this and maybe it'll make you a little bit uncomfortable, but the amount of people celebrating this thing 4 or 5 days into it, like, oh my God, Israel took out all their targets. Look how easy it was. We've been here before. I've seen this movie.
I'll be honest with you, Dave, as someone who's not pushing regime change or American involvement, as I've said, in the way that you think people are trying to do, I am celebrating the fact that Iran is no longer enriching uranium to 60%. I think that is worth celebrating. I think that's a good thing. I think we should all be relieved that that's happening.
Yeah, I kind of agree, but I also
we should be concerned about the risks.
I also agree
maybe
with Dave Smith when he says this could.
Oh, that's a perfect way to end a debate for Piers Morgan. That is just so on brand. Yep, I agree, but I also agree with you. I'm going to jump on whichever side wins this, so that I'm still popular and I can get the clips. How poetic.
Horribly wrong.
But that's what we're all saying. I'm saying that too.
Yeah, I agree.
This is war. Like, no one knows how it's going to turn out exactly.
I agree. I mean,
I've
gone as far as saying I think that unlike the Iraq war in 2003, I feel like this seems a justified action by Israel to protect its people from what is clear fast-moving acceleration of uranium by a lethal enemy that is wedded to terror groups all over its border who want to kill it. I understand that. It seems justified. Now, does that mean I think it's going to work and isn't going to cause huge problems? No. And I think the jury is very firmly out on that. And it's going to be an extremely fascinating and turbulent few weeks and months ahead. And I think right now, Donald Trump, probably the loneliest man in the world, sitting in the White House, working out what does he actually do now. And if he does press the button on attacking Iran, that will go really against
You're underestimating Trump.
Other than specifically
Don't bet
Iran
against Trump.
cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. But in terms of starting a war in the Middle East, that is really antithetical against everything he's said he stands for. So it's a really interesting, momentous decision for Donald Trump to be taking, and the consequences could be enormous. But gentlemen, I've really enjoyed this debate. Thank you both for agreeing to do it. I think it was constructed in the right tone. We didn't descend into ad hominem attacks.
Can I just say I have a much bigger penis than you, Piers, and you, Dave.
That's actually almost certainly not true.
We will reference to the George Galloway episode yesterday.
And Dave Smith.
What's that?
No, is the most well hung of the three of us. So why don't we just leave it with Dave Smith?
Yeah, I'm going to say right now, I called it that he destroyed Dave Smith. I am going to keep the same title because he absolutely did destroy Dave Smith 100%. For all the reasons that we've said, we went through the whole. It was a constant theme through it. Dave Smith just refers to Iraq and Afghanistan. Forget about all the other wars prior to that. Like he picks the exact wars in which America failed regime change. Agreed. Absolutely agree with that. Completely different story. No boots on the ground. And at the end of it, he's going to be left red-faced, especially if Trump follows through with exactly what I think he's going to do. But time will tell. The fact is that if Trump actually does bomb it, nothing's going to happen. There are going to be no boots on the ground. And remember, hold these clowns accountable and Piers Morgan, so hold Dave Smith accountable to every wrong prediction he got. And Piers Morgan, I love how he's got 1 foot here, 1 foot there, ready to jump into whatever camp to say that he predicted exactly what was going to happen. But his biggest problem here is he's betting against Trump. He thinks that Trump is sitting in the White House alone trying to work out what he's going to do. Dude, he's been involved in this the whole time, the whole way through. He gave that 60-day warning. Day 61, they bombed. He made Iran feel comfortable, chill, relax, so that Israel could do what they needed to do and take out the entire top brass. Trump is part of the plan. Trump knows what he's doing here. I have faith in Trump, and I'm going to be excited to see how this ends up de-escalating at the end of it. And I personally do hope there is a regime change, but I do hope that it's the Shah. I'm less worried about anyone that's going to come in and take it over than the nutcases at the top now. I'll quickly read one super chat that we have here before we end today's live stream, which is from Jason, $10. Thank you for the super chat. Jason says, paid to get past YTAI. Okay, sorry, I didn't know there's something going on. There was a chance to regime change Iran back in 2010 when there was a popular uprising, but Obama decided to sit out on his hands instead because he stood with the regime. Yeah, and I agree. Like, I don't know if Obama was standing with the regime or was too much of a coward to back it for many of the reasons that is argued here by the isolationists, that everybody, like, remember in 2010, that was towards the end of the Iraq war. They'd been in Afghanistan for ages. Like, America just didn't want to get behind anything else. It was a completely different time. But Obama is the reason we're in all this situation now, with everything, all his behavior, his diplomacy in that period brought us to the position we're in now. And I know that Trump, I hope and pray and believe that Trump is going to fix that. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that watch party reacting live to this debate, and I'm going to keep the title on this because I back it 100%. God bless, have a good weekend. I might go on and do debates a bit later in the afternoon, so make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get the update of when I go live. Love you all.